Boy, it is amazing when you get on national TV and say something, how sometimes they mistake what you're trying to say or misconstrue what you're trying to say. I did say that I thought it was inappropriate and not good and not a good tone to set for the president's person, Ken Salazar, to say he would put his boot heel on the throat of BP. But here's what's interesting about the news and how they get it wrong half the time. The local newspaper, Jack's friends at the local newspaper, wrote an editorial saying I shouldn't use such language. Well, it wasn't my language. It was Ken Salazar's language, and all I was complaining about is that's not appropriate kind of rhetoric and tenor for a president to take or his administration to say he's going to put his boot heel on the throat of someone. Now, that doesn't mean I don't want BP to be accountable. I, like all Kentuckians and Americans, want BP to pay for the mess. Absolutely. In fact, I don't want them to go out of business where they can't pay for the mess, and that's what that kind of rhetoric could do. I want BP to be in business so it can afford to pay for the mess, but we should be working together, the federal government, the state government, and BP to clean up for it, and BP should be paying for it. But you can see how things get misconstrued. With regard to the sweetheart deal, Jack says he's against the sweetheart deal with Medicare where they are no for the drug companies where they don't have to negotiate for prices. Well, guess who passed it? President Obama and the Democrats. Is he going to vote against Harry Reid if he's up there? This is Harry Reid's plan. Are you going to vote for Harry Reid or against Harry Reid? Harry Reid is way off the table, liberal, too liberal for Kentucky, and I don't think Kentuckians want Harry Reid to continue to lead the Senate. Those are the questions he's going to have to ask. Nancy Pelosi, President Obama, are they people who represent us here in Kentucky? And I don't think so. With regard to America, whether our best days are ahead or behind, I think America's best days are ahead of us if we do the right thing. But I am very worried if we don't do anything, what could happen. I think we are in perilous times. I think there's a day of reckoning coming, and I fear a second dip into a recession. And if Jack and President Obama get their way on raising taxes, it could be a depression. That's the issue. These are the issues that confront us, and we need to be very, very careful about this. One of the important lessons that came out of the Cold War, and this is a very important description that I don't think comes up enough. The Cold War was won by America because the engine of capitalism defeated the engine of socialism. The Soviets used to show a propaganda film, and they wanted to show how horrible America was and how our poor were doing so poorly. And they filmed a building in the poor section of New York with some broken windows, and they said, oh, this is how the poor in America lives. But it backfired on them because the Soviet citizens looked at that video closely and they saw flickering color television sets in all those windows. The poor in our country are enormously better off than the rest of the world. Doesn't mean we can't do better, but we have to acknowledge and be proud of our system of capitalism, be proud of our American way. Jack says he's going to defend the coal industry, but, you know, he was for cap and trade before he might be against cap and trade. So he's going to have to make a decision. He's going to have to disavow his comments in support of cap and trade. Dr. Dan brought this up, and this was a big issue in the Democrat primary, and this is a big reason why a lot of conservative Democrats are not going to be able to vote for Jack because he's just too liberal. There are a lot of socially conservative Democrats in our state. I am socially conservative. I'm pro-life. Jack's position in favor of abortion is not going to go over well with socially conservative Democrats and Republicans. These are obstacles he will have to overcome, and he's going to have to explain himself to the voters on. These issues will come up, and this campaign will be about issues. But I think people will, in the end, say, enough's enough. Washington's broken. We don't need another career politician who's never worked outside of government, who's always been a part of government. That's the problem. They stay too long. Republicans and Democrats, bring them home. Let's have term limits. He wants to criticize me for not accepting a voluntary term limit. Well, let's see. What if all the good people took term limits and all the rest of them didn't? We had voluntary term limits. Would that be very good? In fact, the U.S. term limits doesn't support this anymore because a lot of good people came home and the bad people stayed. So what we need to do is have a law. We need to have a constitutional amendment and say, let's have term limits. But it's going to be a pretty weak argument for him to say he's against term limits, but he's really going to get me because I'm not for voluntary term limits. We need to have a rule. It's the same with the balanced budget amendment. You can't just say you're for it. We're going to have a rule, because they will not do it on their own. They have shown themselves again and again to be untrustworthy. Look at the pay-as-you-go. Jack and his Democrat colleagues all chastised and went against Jim Bunning when he stood up and said, we passed this rule, we have to obey our rules. They broke their rules 3 times in the first month on pay-as-you-go. They have shown themselves to be untrustworthy. We need a balanced budget amendment. We need term limits. We need a clean sweep. We need to bring a lot of people home. And when we do, then I think America has its greatest days still ahead. Thank you.